Hello, I would like to make a response to Dave of Computing Forever responding to Sargon of Akkad bursting into his stream and Sargon Marxism, I think he called it. If you have problems following me or understanding me, I have a link in the description where I've posted the transcript on my website. From the outset, I'd like to make a few things clear. 1. I respect most of the positions held by Dave. 2. Sargon/Carl imposing himself on Dave's live stream was inappropriate, and I'm not defending his actions, nor am I defending Carl himself, as he very well may be a Marxist. 3. I haven't listened to the live stream because the little that Dave played in his video was painful enough to listen to. 4. I'm not a Marxist, although I am open to socialism in some variety, although that should not have any bearing whatsoever on the legitimacy of my arguments. Rightly angered by Sargon/Carl hijacking his live stream and taking advantage of his very Irishness of being mild-mannered and giving people latitude, Dave has put together a 1.5 hour video arguing against perceived Marxism on Carl's part. My issues with this are as follows. The video is mainly a repetition of a straw man, either intentionally or unintentionally. In title and in the majority of its contents, it's name-calling, rejecting Carl's arguments because he's arguing for Marxism. Ridiculous utopian conservative nonsense is repeated throughout, while at the same time both Dave and Independent Man admit that capitalism is an imperfect system, essentially wanting their cake and to eat it too. One escapable fact of our national and international economies is that the wealthy are becoming wealthier and the poor are in fact becoming poorer, despite the overall standard of living rising over the decades. Companies buy companies, which are bought by corporations, banks buy banks, which form banking cartels, media outlets are bought by media conglomerates, which become media monopolies. The number of the very richest are becoming fewer, while the number of the poorest is growing. Did I just make an argument for Marxism? If you think so, there's something wrong with your brain. It's my position that pointing these facts out triggers fiscal conservatives because their imagination is as limited as that of a Marxist imagination. To both these extremes, only either of these extremes are possible lenses through which to view the world. Despite this autism, the fact remains that the incessant consolidation of wealth into fewer and fewer hands is having an unfair impact on the lives of millions of people. Carl makes the point that the system must incentivize the people to have a stake in society. Dave responds that parents have a stake in society. Having children, they want to see a future for their progeny. This is true. But we need to ask whether parents have faith in the presiding system or whether they see a greater chance for their progeny if they destroy the presiding system. There are people alive today who simply cannot afford to have children. Do they not get a stake in the future? There are people alive today who, consciously or unconsciously, have no faith in the world the system has created. The economic climate doesn't support parenting or stable living situations for a great many people. Do they not get a stake in the future? Dave mischaracterizes Carl's point that some people are not upwardly mobile through no fault of their own. Carl cites the janitor who will always be a janitor, and Dave sardonically exclaims, "Oh, we've got to help all the janitors." No thought given whatsoever to the other economic forces that many blue-collar workers face through no fault of their own. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with these people, except committing the moral sin of wanting to provide a home for their family, only to be caught up in an economic collapse, resulting in their home being repossessed by international banks, an economic condition that wouldn't exist if the world's wealth wasn't consolidated into a few hands. Dave makes the factually incorrect and completely absurd claim that capitalists realizing, "I need people to buy my stuff," protects the vulnerable in society from greed, conspiracy, and harm. It really needs no elucidation, but I will try for the benefit of the cognitively impaired out there. Although it is true that the conditions of most people is maintained at a level where they can continue to be consumers, and fewer at a level where they can occasionally purchase luxury items, this is not maintained by the wealthy. It is maintained overwhelmingly by welfare programs. The scope of charity from the upper classes is limited to the purposes of tax write-offs and public relations. It rarely goes beyond that scope, and an alarming number of charities are rackets benefiting the directors and employees of the charities, or corrupt third world governments. My point is further substantiated by the recent phenomena of the world's largest corporations hoarding trillions of dollars, when theoretically that money could be spent to compete with or absorb their rivals and employ more people, ultimately generating more revenue. This is not happening, because this is not what they want to do. They're either competing in bank balances with each other, or up to something more nefarious. The welfare of the people is the last thing on their minds. Independent man mistakes conservatives and free marketeers for mobsters, tyrants, ruthless capitalists, and faceless corporations when he says that they don't want to see human suffering and poverty. Ideals are great, but the relentless acquisition of power is an ideal in itself, which overrides any ideals that might be held by the 1%. Even charities which ostensibly are anti-poverty and suffering are all too often rackets which benefit the directors and employees more than those they are supposedly helping. It's natural for upper middle class and upper classes to be conservative and free market simply because it serves them. This is human nature, just as much as human nature for those who failed at real-life monopoly to want to tear down the economic system. I'm done with conservative fairy tales, particularly the one that tells us that everyone has an equal opportunity to make it to the top if only they work hard enough. And if they don't get there, it's because they're lazy. This is an idealism born exclusively of Americanism, a lie told to the people to insist that there is no such thing as class in America. It has now spread around the Western world and become gospel truth. This conveniently ignores the billions who do work tirelessly and are ever increasingly conned out of a reasonable living standard and an early retirement. The disingenuous conservative will go on to say, but it's not only the hard worker, but the smart worker, which is true for a minority and for those with a skill set that is particularly in demand at the time. But this caveat ignores the fact that more routinely in this economy, working smart means to crawl on the backs of those who don't work smart. Do we really want to live in a world where most people have to compete for a reasonable standard of living and a fruitful retirement? Do we really want to live in a world of ever dispassionate and disenfranchised people, escaping into porn, booze, drugs, and video games to give them the challenges and rushes that life once upon a time offered? That is the world we now live in, with the condition worsening. We all know that we owe a little of ourselves to our fellow human beings. We at least have to come together and build roads. In this globalized world of today, completely alien to the likes of Adam Smith and Ayn Rand, where is the harm in collectively reassessing our duties to each other and our societies. I personally am not saying that people like Dave, an entrepreneur and genius in his field, should pay more taxes to help all the janitors. I'm saying that people like Dave need to pull their heads out of their fucking asses, stop bullshitting themselves and everyone else, and take a look at the real condition of the world so that maybe we can all begin to rectify some imbalances. I fail to see what his fucking problem is with the idea that all the janitors, for their daily contributions of hard labor to our society, deserve a base level of dignity. I've lost a heck of a lot of respect for this guy, sitting through his hour and a half of straw men, ad hominem, and conservative truisms, by the end of which he just began to sound like an aspiring Marie Antoinette.